first he thought it was just a virus. As time went on, he wasn't so sure. He was sitting in a curry house drinking Kingfisher, and all he was getting was the sensation of refreshing bubbles, none of the pissy aftertaste. His mates were jabbering on about this coronavirus thing coming over from China. No worse than the flu, they said. Media blowing things out of proportion, they said. But all he was thinking was, why can't I taste my Vindaloo? He could feel the burn all right. Sweat beading beading on his forehead, the usual tears of joy seeping from his eyes. But he had specifically forced the crew to come to this place off Brick Lane because they used fresh coriander in the sauce. Yet he could taste none of it. Even the chutney, green as Chernobyl crickets, did nothing to his taste buds. Mike noticed him hitting the poppadoms a little strong. You okay, mate? Can't taste the thing, man. He switched to the mango chutney and felt cold phlegm slip down his throat. You know the only cure for a cold, don't you? Bring me to it, brother. The fact that he couldn't taste the cheap bourbon at 53 feet east was a contributing factor in how much he put away. The hangover in the morning was like something from the end of days. A week later, aguizia and anosmia got added to the official symptoms. The whole crew were put in quarantine for 10 days. When he got back to the office, the vibe had turned paranoid. Every window in the place was thrown open, masks on between calls, sanitizing their hands before making a cup of tea. He chased some leads, but the punters were not in the mood. Do you know what's going on in the world? Do you really think I'm hiring new staff? He started eating his sandwiches at about 11:30. Some dried tomatoes, Marmite and tuna. Because what did it matter? He scrolled through an article about people who lived without a sense of taste or smell. Victims described their lives as sanitized, neutralized, like living behind glass. That afternoon, their boss announced that they were working from home until the further notice. Then shit got weird. Taking calls on the toilet, logging into meetings from bed, eating breakfast cereal at all hours, drinking wine at any opportunity, buying loo roll at any opportunity, Zoom, Skype, WhatsApp, Teams, panicked colleagues calling you at 1 a.m. to change permissions on some file they needed for the morning. Out of the five housemates, 3 of them were trying to do it all remote. The shitty BT router didn't know what hit it. Meetings became jittery staccato affairs. Work was lost before it could be saved. And above, around, and sometimes directly in the middle of all this stress, floated Davy and Pete in their dressing gowns and slipper. 2 furloughed barmen making cocktails with whatever they found on their daily tour of the kitchen. It was only when he poured milk into his cornflakes and instead got a heavy dose of coconut rum that he realised his taste had returned. And still, he felt like he was living behind glass. Probably the job, the ridiculous hours, the obligatory birthday Zooms on a Friday when all he wanted to do was unplug and get drunk enough to forget he'd been stuck inside for months. The lads were obviously feeling the same because Davy and Pete got up one day and drove back to Kent. Mike lasted longer. But once the winter kicked in and it became clear another lockdown was on its way, he pissed off back to Scotland. Then Lucy did something similar. Yes, they'd only been seeing each other for like 7 months, but still, gone back to Belfast, catch you after the plague, was a little bit cold. He got back on the apps, wrote work mails with one hand and swiped right with the other. Eventually his perseverance paid off. Annoyingly, her name was Lucy too. They did the usual texting, breezy chit-chat, the odd late-night flirtation. By the time they organised a walk around the Tottenham Reservoir, he was sure they'd have nothing to say. Still, maybe this is what he needed, a flesh and blood encounter. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon, but there were loads of people out walking. She stood near the coffee shop, sipping a flat white under her Tate umbrella. She spotted him coming up the path and gave a little wave, green nail polish fluttering in front of the red fingerless gloves. He was no longer shocked by how different people looked in the flesh, but somehow her perky little nose and rosy cheeks fitted the whole Sunday stroll vibe. "You been on many of these?" she asked, halfway around the reservoir. "These?" "Internet dates." He was sharing her umbrella, and it felt dishonourable to lie. Like, in total, or since lockdown? No. Me neither. She stopped and looked him straight in the eye. Was she about to pour out her heart about some beautiful Italian who ran back to Rome to care for his sick mama? Listen, John. I can't really be bothered with the small talk. How about we go back to mine and do a few lines? Anywhere else in the world, the euphemism is coffee, not at Tottenham Hale. They snorted a few off her kitchen table and then got down to business. Pulling and poking and licking and sucking. The bedroom was full of her smell, his mouth was full of her tongue, but it felt like he was watching it from across the room. And when he entered her from behind and she rolled her eyes, he felt like he was watching him, watching her from behind the screen. They swapped juices for a bit longer, then he got a taxi home. The next morning, they went back into lockdown. The same remote work sans the empathetic management. Do what you can became, what have you done? Account for your time, justify your job. He swapped the wine for whiskey. Then one Saturday, watching Jules Holland interview Dua Lipa in a basement barely big enough for the grand piano, he felt his breath hollowing out and his heart rate rising. Was it the claustrophobic nature of the setting? Was it the old man, young girl dynamic? Was it the earnest discussion of assembly pop music? Whatever it was, the panic attack was coming on strong. He switched off the screen, poured the alcohol down the sink, and started doing yoga with Adrienne every morning.
That's all my girlfriend is.
But it was always sunny where Adrienne was. She was always centered and wholesome and touching her toe to her forehead in the best light. He scoured YouTube for yoga classes and shitty bedsits. Some yogi hung over in a London house share. Apparently that wasn't a thing. So it was Adrienne with her perfect posture, Adrienne with her calming voice, Adrienne with her non-judgmental platitudes. When he got the vaccine, he expected to feel elation, to go sprinting out of Edmonton Medical Centre and start licking handrails in the tube station. Instead, he went home, took some paracetamol and watched the news. Some woman came on and they were asking her questions about the uneven effect of the virus, why people from certain backgrounds were more adversely affected than others. She had a kind face, this woman. Like you could tell she'd spent her life caring for others, but she stiffened at that question, visibly hardened, and a steeliness glinted in her eyes as she spoke. COVID-19 has not created these issues. What it has done, in the most tragic manner, is expose the problems that were already there. He grabbed his jacket and went straight out of the house. It was Gail's 30th. She'd booked a table at the Phoenix, a reunion of 6 that he had planned to reduce to 5. After effects of the vaccine, blinding headache, big day tomorrow, whatever. But now he couldn't get there fast enough. He cycled like a maniac down the Holloway Road, took his life in his hands at King's Cross, came up Oxford Street like a man possessed. It was only when he walked into the bar and saw them dressed up to the nines for their first proper night out that he realised the state he was in. Grey t-shirt now black with perspiration, sweatpants with a hole at the left knee, sliders over Star Wars socks. John! Gail was up on her feet and coming in for a hug, but then halted. Social distancing or social ostracisation? If he had a present, he could have filled the distance between them, but he didn't. He could see the others trade looks. He could see the messages appear on their screens later, the email to his responsible brother, the WhatsApp to his worried sister, the hollowing breath, the racing heart. He turned and ran, but he couldn't cycle in this state. The tube was out of the question. He needed some cold water and a place to sit down. He stumbled into an Italian restaurant and went down the steps to the basement. He turned right and found himself in some sort of poetry night happening in the He retreated from the closed eyes of the audience and found the restrooms at the left of the stairs. Cold water never felt so cold, and he stared at himself in the mirror while words murmured through the walls. He knocked his knuckles off the glass and closed his eyes. The reading outside stopped and there was applause. In the toilet stall behind, there was some shenanigans going down. Cokeheads back to their natural environments, he thought. But then the cubicle door swung open, and in the mirror he could see them licking stamps. Was this 1966? Had he travelled back to Woodstock? The bookish cut of the culprits told him no, and then, instead of slamming the door closed, the woman in the glass offered him a dose. "You won't regret it, man," said the reflection of the man. "Made them myself," said the reflection of the woman. He turned his back on the mirror and took the stamp. He followed them into the bar and offered them a drink, but they were already had beers, and in any way, the man was up reading next. He sat down near the front and looked at everyone listening. He wanted to listen to hear what they heard, but thoughts kept getting in the way. He kept losing the thread of the story. The man finished his piece and everyone applauded, but he didn't mean it. He was an imposter amongst people who wrote and read and listened and felt. He went to get up, but the next reader was up. The woman who gave him the stamp. He sat back down and prepared himself for 10 more minutes of suffering. But this story started in the dark, underground, spores spreading through the earth, the mycelium murmuring in the soil, singing paeans to the tree trunks, penetrating the armour of an ant, talking to its chemicals, whispering of faraway flowers and high away in the foliage, sucking down water and getting ready to fruit. Suddenly he was hearing words, the same words firing in the minds of others. He could feel them in the language. The mycelium was pushing up mushroom cups. Enough pressure to break through asphalt. Enough power to lift a fully grown man. The woman looked up from her page and met his eyes. Words, words, words. The sound of breaking glass.